Twin Cities Creation Science Association presents to you Standing for Truth Ministries on Evidence for Adam and Eve. Have you heard that Adam and Eve were not real people and that Genesis should just be viewed as allegorical with only symbolic meaning and not to be taken as literal? Is there actual scientific evidence that says otherwise?
Now, you mentioned a good question with biological decay and the biological decay curve. Well, in a nutshell, because we could discuss this for 2 hours, according to the Bible, Adam lived to 930 years. Biblical patriarchs, they lived hundreds of years, and critics have argued that this is impossible. There's no way somebody could live to 900 or 1,000. It actually turns out, though, that if you plot the ages given in Genesis of the biblical patriarchs, you find a systematic drop-off in lifespans after Noah, who lived 950 years. Now, this could never happen by chance. And this can be correlated to what I was describing here, low impact mutation accumulation. That can be correlated scientifically to increased genetic load. And you can clearly see that the lifespans in Genesis decline according to a well-defined decay curve that began after the great flood of Noah. And it's not an immediate decline like you're jumping off a cliff where it goes from hundreds of years to just boom, right to 80 to 100. No, it is a systematic decline from, you could say, 900 to 600 to 500 to 200 and eventually to what we have today. So one thing I'll mention, I'll hand it to Matt. I co-authored an article that refutes critics of genetic entropy with Christopher Roop, and we had the privilege of having that technical article rigorously reviewed by Dr. John Sanford himself. And we showcased that the genetic entropy problem is even worse than once previously thought, because it turns out that the nearly neutral mutation rate, which is fast, approximates what's called the fixation rate, where mutations get stuck in place in populations over time. In technical terms, fixation is basically when a gene has achieved fixation, where its frequency has reached 100% in the population. The problem for evolutionists is this: the majority of mutations are slightly deleterious. So if you have that many mutations in the evolutionary model becoming fixed or stuck in place, that is irreversible and irreparable damage species-wide. And now that they're stuck in place, selection can't see them. Selection can't do anything to stop that damage. And so that's a technical article that you can read on our website, standfortruthministries.com, and it discusses in detail the genetic entropy thesis. Matt, is there anything you'd like to add to that, brother?
Yeah, I really like the biological decay curve when it comes to the observable evidence that we see with animal inbreeding and pure breeds. There is a drop-off that we see from that. And then what happens is we can go over to the Kong et al. Study in 2012 that showed that there's a progression of mutations that get handed down maternally from the father the older he gets. So they extrapolated that, like, well, if Noah himself was 500 and he had kids, how many mutations would be passed on? And it was such a large amount. That's why we see such a drop-off in age of his children and his grandchildren until we get to the lower age limits that we see today. And this is in the peer-reviewed literature itself. But we can also go to the wide variety of evidence that's outside of that, because remember, God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what people did. That's why God confused the languages to force mankind to spread out. That's why we see the majority of haplogroups forming in the Middle Eastern area. It's why we see the arrival of new language families all in that area as well, and no new language families ever arising after that. I mean, you can't make this up. It's so good. The evidence is right there. And then we go over to the population growth rates. They match as well. Then we go to the germline mutation rates. Those match as well. It's just the evidence is everywhere, and it's so good.